This episode is all about creativity, and we are all creative in our own ways.
It is part of the human condition is to be creative. Not in the sense of we all paint pictures or make music or make films or anything like that, but the day-to-day choices of problem solving, of using our imagination.
I've always been a raging fan of the work that they do at the Mighty Creatives, using art to inspire young people to find their sense of belonging and to really think about where their life is going. And Nick really shares his passion, his expertise in all things creative.
Through our creative mentoring work, our mentors will work very directly on a one-to-one basis with young people. Then where that goes depends on what that young person is interested in and what their desires are. And the mentor is there to kind of challenge them, support them. It's not about going, after this time with you, you're going to go and get back into your classroom. Not about that destination. It's not about that output. It's the process and the journey that's really important.
Welcome, Nick, and thanks for coming. It's great to kind of invite you on to Inspire to Thrive. For one, we properly got to know each other through Boss Bikes.
We did.
We can talk a bit around our interest on riding bikes and eating cake.
Yeah.
But also, I really wanted to invite you on to Inspire to Thrive around the amazing work that you do at the Mighty Creatives and how you help so many people using creativity in the arts. And so to get started though, before us kind of going into kind of work and your career, I'd just like to know, why do you do what you do?
A, because it's fun. That's important. But also, equally important, more important, is the fact it makes a huge difference to young people. And I've been working, I figured it out the other day, I've been working in this sector now for a good 40 plus years. When I first started all this, I started with a sort of year-long diary, and I looked at my diary a couple of weeks ago, and the first entry on it, it said something like wanting to kind of work with people who hadn't been heard or were invisible or weren't part of the kind of usual cultural scene. And I thought, actually, I mean, my career's done this, as people's do, there've been a number of kind of choices I've made. But what's been constant through that is that desire to want to hear what people have to say, particularly people who don't normally get a platform to say things or produce things or express themselves through kind of cultural practice, really. So that's really been one of my main motivations, is that desire to, it's a cliche, but it's still true, about making the invisible visible and the inaudible audible, and hearing those different voices, really. And I think that's what's always interesting in this kind of work, is the difference that comes about through that kind of process.
And do you feel your role sometimes is a voice for those unheard communities?
Mighty Creatives, I think certainly we give a platform to young people to express themselves and to be heard, and critically to make a difference. So it's not just a matter of kind of being able to say something and being like in a bit of an echo chamber where you just keep saying the same thing to people who agree, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about sort of putting that into a kind of real world of wanting to kind of change policy and practice and make a difference to young people's lives, yeah.
And that's what I've always seen with TMC, is that you are a voice for the sector, using kind of sort of some of the work that you do to make those connections on a kind of sort of more higher level, connecting, a sole trader or a young person who's just starting out in their career with then opportunities that they might not have a voice to kind of sort of like be heard in that.
Yeah.
How is it that you guys have gone about from building up TMC to have that voice and kind of have then that credibility?
I mean, I've been there 8 years this July, so there was a period of time before that, so a few other people kind of set it up back in 2009. But what's been interesting through that whole process is the notion of youth voice, young people's voice, is in our DNA, really. It was one of the things that started us, and it's kind of carried through various regimes and staff teams and so on. And I think it's exemplified in the name of the company, because when they first started, it was something like the Young People's Advisory Group for Culture or something like that. And they took it to a group of young people and said, "What do you think of this?" And they went, blah, 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 nah, rubbish. And they came up with the title, The Mighty Creatives. So from the word go, we've had that voice expressed into, to us. We've incorporated it into our obviously branding and strategy and operations and stuff like that. And it's been a thing you buy into when you join TMC, is that importance of having young people's voices at the centre of our practice. And I think that just saying voices there, I think it's important to stress that when we talk about young people's voice, it's also recognising there isn't just one young person's voice. It's not one totalising one thing you hear. That young people, like everybody else, have a range of different opinions, and so the job is to kind of draw all those out and reflect back to young people what is being said and what we've heard. And understanding that whole voice thing isn't as straightforward as going, just tell us what you think and you speak for everybody, because no one speaks for everybody.
That can be quite challenging at times, because when you've got such a diverse range of ideas, opinions, and also not having to prove anything. No. That's what I love working with young people, is that they say it exactly how it is. Yeah. Especially my 7-year-old daughter at the moment. But it's having that kind of sort of like honesty is quite brave as an organisation to kind of sort of do that. How do you advise others in order to kind of have that conversation?
Well, the way we do it now is that we've set up a youth voice network around the Midlands, and out of that has come a process of developing a strategy which brings in or refers to a lot of other kind of participation strategies and principles drawn from lots of writers and practitioners over time, and that's constantly refined against the reality of being in front of a group of young people on a wet Wednesday afternoon and going, how does this work now? So it's a mix of kind of theory and practice, if you like, and it's always developing and changing, but it's been shaped up into a strategy for us that we can go, this is how this works after quite a few years of trying it out and developing it, that we can feel confident in that strategic approach. And practically in TMC that turns into what we call our youth board. So we every now and then recruit 4 young people to come and join an advisory board who are involved very directly in our strategy and our vision and mission, but also involved in the delivery of our work as well. So there are a number of stories we have there of people who've come onto the youth board and have been able to kind of express themselves, not just about the vision and mission and the business plan, so you can see their voices there, but in terms of the kind of practice we have as well, in terms of creative mentoring, for example. So it's crudely, walking the walk and talking the talk and making sure those things cohere. It's not just saying something and doing something else completely different.
So you mentioned 40 years you've been walking that walk.
Yes.
Quite a long journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what kind of inspired you or influenced you to kind of get to where you are today?
I trained as a biochemist. Okay, so I did all the kind of science background at school and went to uni and did a biochemistry degree, which I really loved. It was great. But it was in those days where you go, I'm going to go to university in order to expand my mind and do something else. So I got through my degree and I had a PhD lined up in Germany a year later. And I thought, in that year later, or during that gap year, I'm going to try something else. So I joined a theatre company, and one thing led to another. And then, so a year later, the PhD had disappeared, but we'd ended up in a minibus, touring up and down the M1 with a group of 6 or 7 others as well. We performed, fun enough, at what was Leicester Poly back in those days. But I think that was, for me, was the kind of one major fork in the road, was that thing of the science is great, but actually there's something about the kind of sociality and the conviviality and that ability to express yourselves through the arts that I didn't find in that kind of scientific background or training, if you like. And that was about I suppose the thing with science is a creative science is some of the best activity to get involved in, like the best creative arts. But there is a lot of the right answers and adhering to protocols and people's opinions. They're valuable, but it's not the same way as if going, I'm going to write a theatre show or direct a theatre show or act, or it's a different kind of way of being, really. And that way of being was hugely attractive, and it stayed with me.
Is there a science in creativity?
Is there a science in creativity? Well, that's a really great question, because I think it's one of those sort of elusive butterflies that the more you try and pin it down, the more it flies off, And people have tried measuring creativity for decades. There's lots of tests you can do that people do go to that measure your creativity, or and all that. But in the end, personally, you cannot define it so neatly, really. I think it's a complex phenomenon. It's very culturally specific, so what we might talk as being creative, colleagues in Japan might see something else as being creative.
How important is having creativity when it comes to leadership?
I think it's important for everybody to show creativity, and I go a step further is go that actually everybody is creative, okay? It is part of the human condition is to be creative. Not in the sense of we all paint pictures or make music or make films or anything like that, but the day-to-day choices of problem solving, of using our imagination, of critical thinking, and all those other things that make up a kind of creative mindset. We all do it. We are all demonstrate creative thinking, creative practice. It's as important to us as breathing or digestion in my mind. So I don't think it's leadership alone needs creativity, because it does, but then so does absolutely everything. And everybody has that capacity to be creative in lots of different ways, not just to say through kind of arts or science practice, but our daily lives. And one of the things that occurred to me a while back was, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have all the things like physiology and housing and food at the bottom, and it all peaks up to the top of this triangle with self-actualization. And the argument with that triangle goes that what you've got to do with people is sort out their basic physiological needs first, and then being creative or self-actualizing is a bit of a luxury, comes at the top of the pyramid. It occurred to me a while back that that pyramid causes a lot of problems in the kind of arts world, because you get into sort of funding situations and people go, well, we need a medical hospital, or we need a medical procedure more than we need a dance workshop, which is being a bit simplistic, but you know what I mean. But I think actually if you could put creativity at the bottom of that triangle and argue that it was as important to support people's creativity as it was to feed them and house them, then I think you'd have a very different kind of cultural world we'd be living in.
Do you think that would give a bit more autonomy to us individually, so we'd actually all problem solve ourselves rather than being so reliant on the state or they do it for us?
I think it would certainly open open our eyes to live our lives differently if we understood that creative thinking, creativity, was part of our basic biological need, if you like. And I think it would affect school curricula, it would affect what we expect from schools, it would affect what we expect from employment and all those kind of, those choices for us to make. So I think it would have a lot of kind of consequences for our lives as a whole if we went, yeah, it's as important to nurture your creativity as it is to feed you wholesome food.
So true. And fortunately, I've always had guidance, support to be creative. But so many people lose their creativity or lose the confidence to feel that I'm creative.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody who goes, I'm not creative anymore?
I think if people were really interested in going, how do I become more creative? I think that's a process of going, what did you do when you got up in the morning? What choices have you made today? What are the kind of problems you faced today? And how did you approach that? And then that will be a further conversation about how do you understand risk and how comfortable do you feel with risk? And funny enough, we were talking about messiness there a little earlier, weren't we? And a big thing for me is about mess. And how do we deal with mess? And how comfortable we deal with that? Because again, a number of other writers have written about this, but for me, the whole creative process relies on mess initially. And the process is about shaping mess into something coherent, And you'll see that in schools, that in certainly kind of early years and primary settings, they'll be talking about tidy time. And it's the last moment, if you've got some kids working on something, the last thing they need to support their creativity is someone go, tidy time, tidy it up, get rid of it. Because that's not, that's the block on the kind of creative process, if you like.
It's interesting you talk about mess there, because mess is almost like the problem, and we're trying to problem solve, so then we're tidying the mess. But when we're then going to secondary school, suddenly then we don't have the mess to tidy up. We have to conform.
Absolutely, because we've got to get you through the exams. I mean, the agenda in secondary schools is completely different from in primary and early years. And there's a lot of discussion about what's lost when you go through that process from early primary to secondary. But the agenda in secondary is different, isn't it? It's about focus on qualifications, get you through your exams, what are you going to do next? You know, what job do you want to be? And all those kind of vocationally driven questions, which a lot gets thrown out in that kind of focusing down which track are you going to go on, what choices you're going to make in year 9 or year 10 or whatever it is. And the whole kind of creativity thing has got bundled up into the arts, hasn't it? And going arts and humanities, that if you're going to be creative, you're going to go and do drama or dance. Fat chance of doing that these days in school, given how all that's working. But we've parceled it up as we got older, haven't we? So in a funny sort of way, you have to kind of go through secondary school, come out the other end, and then later on, you might just be able to kind of pick up that kind of creative flame.
Making those decisions at 14, 15, 16 that are a sliding door.
Yes.
To then going, am I going to be creative? Am I not?
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting bit.
Yeah.
So how does the Mighty Creatives help and support people maybe making those decisions?
I think now, it was very different kind of a couple of years ago when we were funded through a different funder and had a kind of different set of agendas to work to. But now I think two answers to that. One is through our creative mentoring work, our mentors will work very directly on a one-to-one basis with young people. And through that process, I mean, this question, the process starts with, what are we going to do today? Not what am I going to do to you, or are you going to do to me? What are we going to do together? So it's important, again, in terms of a kind of creativity, that it's a relational process, and we understand that from the word go. But then where that goes depends on what that young person is interested in and what their desires are. And the mentor is there to kind of challenge them, support them, be a kind of bit of a critical friend, and help that journey on. So that's part of that process. It's not about going, after this time with you, you're going to go and get back into your classroom, or you're going to get a kind of grade 1 in whatever subject you're studying. It's not about that destination. It's not about that output. It's the process and the journey that's really important. Processes, outputs can come later on. I think at the older end of the scale, if you like, how Mighty Employers work is focusing much more on getting young people who particularly struggled, who are in the sort of shadows of our society, if you like, into either employment or into enterprise. So there is a kind of goal there in that process, because of that, the age where they are, and people want to make decisions about what they want to do with their lives and stuff like that. So we can help that on that front too, and that's very much about, not just about working with a young person to go, can we kind of knock you into shape that fits an employer, but also about working with the employer to go, here are the young people who are coming to you. They have a series of kind of characteristics and experiences that we would like you to kind of pay homage to, if you like, and work with, rather than kind of slap them into shape. Does that make sense?
Completely. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? There's all these boxes of destination that you mentioned. And so many things are all designed on where are you going, what you're going to end up.
Yeah, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
All that stuff.
And
I don't know the answer to that yet myself.
No, but I think it's interesting, as you were saying, it's like the journey always goes in a illogical, route, but you kind of sort of stick with some of those core values.
Yeah.
What are your core values, and how do they relate to the Mighty Creatives values?
I'd like to think tolerance, curiosity, the power of imagination, the importance of diversity, the willingness to take risks, willingness to accept ambiguity, and the understanding that we can't do this stuff alone. Nobody can do anything on their own, and that goes for TMC as well, as much as anybody else. So that translates into, we will do a lot of partnership working, want to, because we can't do it alone. So I think in terms of what I brought to the table, again echoes what was at TMC's table anyway before I started. But over time, with the kind of staff team we have and the trustees we have and the young people, the youth board that we have, those values are shaped and refined and honed further. But there's not a process that goes, actually, that was a set of values then, here's a new set of values now. It doesn't work like that. When you join the organisation, you're buying into what it stands for and its history and its future and its ambition, rather than going, well, that was all very well. Let's turn us into a dance school, you know, and train kids to the West End.
Well, it's interesting because that kind of inclusive voice and the kind of heart of some of the things that you spoke about is so connected to, I suppose, my values and my vision of the world, and that's why I instantly warmed to TMC when it first came about. And you guys truly collaborate. You know, the partnership work that you do is so authentic, and you know, you celebrate success with partners, but also you allow for failure, where
a learning opportunity.
A learning opportunity, yeah. And that's what, you know, failure's now become. Then.
That's it, yeah.
It's not become, it is the learning, and it always has been.
Yeah.
How do you create that culture within TMC?
I don't create culture. No one person creates culture. Culture is one of those things that emerges from people who are, you know, in a place over a period of time together. You can't mandate culture, whatever some people might say, but I think you can provide a climate for it or opportunities for it to grow. And I think that's through going back to those values, really, of kind of about diversity, tolerance, ambiguity, and interest and curiosity in what people have to say. I think underpinning that there is a kind of democratic energy at work as well. So it's not about saying you might be in a particular role and therefore, you know, you're top of a hierarchy and we're going to make sure everybody remembers that, you know, from 9 to 5 every day. I mean, it is kind of a legal hierarchy in that sense, and some people, you know, it's crudely, in my role, you've got the power of hire and fire, whereas if you're in a coordinator role or admin role, you don't necessarily have that responsibility. So it is a hierarchy, and just being honest about that's how it is. But it's also recognising that everybody brings experiences to the table, and their voices and their lived experiences, and valuing those for what people bring to us through their time with us, you know.
I really like what you said there, the climate to create a culture, because no one can form a culture, and you know, everybody contributes.
Yeah.
How, on a wider society, when it comes to, you know, kind of sort of the arts, creativity, the voluntary sector, the bits that you guys kind of contribute to, how could we all collaborate together to create a better climate?
From my point of view, part of that culture we're in at the moment is about populism. It's also about a culture that is valuing or ignoring hate crime and racism and bigotry. I think it's about calling that stuff out when you hear it and see it, and following that through. And we've seen over the weekend, there was a footballer in, where was it? Was it Sheffield Wednesday, I think, or somebody in Britain was playing football, was being insulted from the terraces by various kind of racist comments. So they stopped the game. But you do have to ask yourself what then happens afterwards. What are you going to do about it? Because you can talk and, you know, you can go like this for all you like, but if you don't do something through or carry it through, then all it does is perpetuate everything you claim to be upset by, you know? So I think there's so many things to kind of be working on in terms of appreciating a, you know, diverse, inclusive culture across the country, that it's like, where on earth do you start? You can only start with what you know in, and what the kind of sector you were in, and the organisation you're in, and your own family and your neighbours. You know, it starts there, doesn't it, I think, really?
Exactly, and the bit which I feel so strongly about is then starting with then your family, your immediate kind of social circles. But when working in a sector that's quite reliant on public funding, and you know, often you're having to live by the values of where that money comes from. That might be the funder, the government, wherever those different bits are. How do people stay true to their values when they are navigating through?
I think that's a real challenge, and I think particularly when it's become more, it is always competitive. It's getting more and more competitive, and the challenge always is, do we chase the money? And it's very, you know, if you're running an organisation and you've got sort of, you know, 15, 20 salaries to worry about, chasing the money sometimes seems like a pretty good option if it means that those jobs are kind of maintained and you can maintain what you're doing. The big risk with that, though, is that they call it mission drift, don't they? You can chase the money, and before you know it, Instead of going over there, you're going over there, and you don't want to be going over there because it's got nothing to do with what you're about. So I think that's a constant challenge in any organisation that any commercial organisation or public funded organisation, any business for that matter, has that challenge of what do we want to do, what we've been paid to do, and do those two coalesce, or is one pulling in one way and one the other way? And I think all you can do is be vigilant on it and keep checking yourselves and checking with your participants, your beneficiaries, your customers, your stakeholders. There's a constant check in that process, isn't there? Your staff will be the first ones to tell you whether you're going off piste or not.
Yeah, because I've seen TMC stay strong to those beliefs and be very entrepreneurial in the last couple of years. Tell me a bit about this chapter that you've been going through and coming out the other side from what I see from looking outside.
I think, historically, Mighty Creators was funded very heavily by the Arts Council of England for many years, which was fantastic and actually quite a privileged place to be in, because if we were getting money, it meant somebody else wasn't getting money, crudely. So it was a very privileged place to be. The problem with that kind of model was it can breed a kind of dependency on it. And that's not just us, it's the kind of sector as a whole. If you get regular funding from somewhere that's good funding, you go, that's a relief. We can sort of depend on it. And part of you is going, don't depend on it because it comes to an end. And my own background was I sort of came into TMC through that process, having set up a social enterprise that didn't have funding. We did a lot, all the income was self-generated through projects and one-off pieces of work and all that sort of stuff. So when I came into TMC, I was kind of keen for us to go, let's move away from the funding argument or agenda, because we always talk about fundraising, don't we? In my mind, it's always this, can I have some funds, please? This outstretched hand thing. And what I wanted to do was bring in a kind of a concept of income generation, really, rather than funding. I mean, it's playing with words on one level, but it's also about trying to instill that we can generate our own income as well. We don't just have to be on the receiving end of this stuff. We don't just have to be passive, but we can be active in that generating of income, in order to fill the engine to go where we want to go. So that was a kind of thing I kind of came in with. And over a period of time, we've been able to demonstrate that. We've been able to kind of trade. We've been able to get consultancies, been able to supplement that kind of core income to such an extent that when the Arts Council plug did eventually get pulled and we kind of came to the end of that privileged place, we gave ourselves a good chance to continue without that level of public funding, if you like, so which is where we are now. But I think it's a cultural understanding that that's what we needed to do, and making sure everybody else understands that's what we need to be doing, and having people buy into that, and people that do buy into it,
From your expertise, experience with then the work that you do through TMC, how could we tweak that model?
I think a lot of the time the problem boils down to a question that a head teacher will ask you that goes, I've got to get exam results, I've got to up my maths and literacy results. How are you going to do that with an artist or dancer or whatever? And it turns into a conversation of attainment or achievement. You can't have, the argument is you can't have both. When in fact, there is a lot of evidence, over the last 20 years that if you get your creative practice, your creative teaching right, you can have an impact on attainment and on achievement and on the attitude of young people in school. So it's not a one or the other, but what's happened is we've turned into this kind of binary thinking that goes, it's one or the other, you can't have both, when in fact you can have both, But that requires, again, a change of culture in a particular school, from governors through the senior leadership, through the teachers as a whole, and giving teachers, in the end, the space to develop their own creative teaching styles and practices.
How do you use the arts and creativity to build trust, connection with young people, but also then some of your stakeholders?
What you don't do, you don't go into a group of young people and say, we're going to do Macbeth and you're going to enjoy it, okay? There's a way of approaching Macbeth that is enjoyable and develops voice and creative practice. But the model of I've got something and I'm going to impose it on you and you're going to have to behave in it and perform as I direct, ain't the way of doing it. So my point in saying that is arts practice in itself isn't necessarily creative. I mean, it sounds crazy, but there is an arts practice that isn't about interested in your creative voice. It's about interested in me directing a show that you're in and I'm pulling the strings and you're the puppet. I think there is an arts practice, though, that it stems from a pedagogical approach, which is about placing the young person at the centre of that process, of honouring what they have to say, honouring it and critiquing it, not just going whatever you like, but it's about dialogue with other people in the room, other young people, and also with adults in the room as well. And understanding that dialogue is generative and allows for a kind of rich experience or rich interpretation of those young people's experiences. So on that model, you might go, Macbeth is a starting point, okay, but we might end up with something that looks nothing like Macbeth. And in my mind, that process is perhaps closer to a process which is democratic, which is about developing a culture of expression and valuing those young people's expressions of it.
And isn't that process still the same that could happen in a science-based subject?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it is. Yeah. I mean, I've said earlier, I think good science is as creative as good arts. Not necessarily, though, because a lot of science is technocratic, technological, do as you're told, follow this sequence, follow this paradigm. But some of the best science really pushes the paradigms and pushes the limits and asks lots of awkward questions, and you've got to have a fantastic sort of visualization or ability to visualize other worlds in science, particularly, talking about astrophysics or quantum mechanics. It's amazing stuff.
It's interesting. We talked a bit about, I suppose, failure and how do you encourage people, especially young people, to lean into failure?
I think by not using the word. People talk about learning experiences, don't they? And that can get a bit of a cliche as well. But it is about going, everything's a learning, an opportunity to learn, isn't it? Okay, we've tried something. Did it work? Did it have the intended outcomes that you wanted to have? And if not, what do we do next time round? It's that thing of, who said this? Was it Sartre about, or Beckett? You stand, you fall, you fail, you fall, you get up, you fail, you fall, you get up, you keep doing it, So it's about, I suppose, demonstrating there's nothing wrong with falling, because you can get back up again in the kind of context we're talking about,
Well, I think I'm a huge advocate for falling over because it's the only way that you really learn.
Yeah. I mean, walking, they say, is you're falling when you're walking. It's just one foot stops you falling to the ground, and then you move again. Falling with style, absolutely. Yeah.
But unfortunately, in our society, we're told not to learn. Then, if we're using that as a word, we're told we have to get it right.
Yeah.
The only answer is A or B, black or white.
Yeah.
So how can you encourage people to want to learn if we're going to use? So I'll take that on board. We won't use the word failure anymore. So,
the F word.
We're no longer using the F word.
Good.
But how can we then encourage people to want to learn?
It depends on the kind of context you're kind of working in, doesn't it, really? If we were working in the theatre, for example, then you would be working in a way that goes, let's experiment. Let's try this out. The question is, does it work? Okay, I'm not going to give you the answer. Here's a piece of text. I'm not going to tell you how to speak it or how to interpret it. I'm going to say, let's look at the rules on how that text works. Okay, so a piece of text might have speeches in it, okay, or speech marks, or underlining, or something. And it's talking through, this is how this text works, and then going, right, those are the rules for this text. How do you break the rules of the text? And what does that do to reinterpret it or represent it? Now, you could say, if you did that with a piece of Shakespeare, someone might say that you've got it all wrong, okay, from this kind of, Macbeth speech or whatever. And it's about, and you would therefore have failed. But if you go, actually, we're not starting with your paradigm, we're starting with exploring the text in a different way. And we go, what you've done now, let's check it out after a couple of hours. Does it work? What's the consequence of what you've done? Okay, what have you learnt through that process? And we don't have to use the F word at all in that. It's about what's happened, what have you achieved, what have you learnt, what came out of that strange experience.
can hear the scientist in you coming out. It sounds like a hypothesis.
It is a hypothesis, absolutely. It is hypothetical thinking, yeah.
You know, I'm seeing it already in my 7-year-old daughter, who her voice is getting taken away.
Yeah.
And there's certain ways that she's been taught and certain influences that having on her life, not just through the education system, but also society, you know, friends, all those different bits.
Yeah.
How can we empower people to stay on that?
I want to pick you up on that thing about her voice is being taken away, okay? Because I'm a big fan of Toy Story, you know, Disney. And in Toy Story 4, that's all about how the voice box has been taken away from one of the characters. And this really kind of hit me kind of when I first saw it. And then you realise through the film, there's a lot of things about voice, okay? And we did a bit of more work on that. And you go, actually, how people's voice are taken away or constructed is lots of different ways. You have ventriloquists, okay? And they're dummies. So some people have a voice of someone else because they've got their hand up their back, okay? Other voices are about where you impersonate someone else, okay? That's your voice is repeating what you've been told by someone else. So there's a lot of interesting ways of how voice is constructed and taken away. And I think in school, for example, that can be a thing of don't speak till you're spoken to, isn't it? And we're not going to talk about that now. We're going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about this, and you're going to sit and listen. So there's lots of ways how that voice is taken away and reconstructed. I think it's absolutely fascinating, you know.
It's interesting kind of sort of seeing students who do study things like performing arts. Talking once again about my daughter. Yeah. She's recently went for an audition to get into Matilda. Right. Let's hope that she does. But certainly her voice elevated when she came out. Yeah. It was just the excitement of going through that process. Yeah. Yeah. It's not so much about her, you know, kind of sort of like she'll either learn from it or she'll achieve something. Yeah. But it's inspired her, and now I hear her singing that song. Brilliant. A lot. So it's how can we kind of empower people through the arts or using the arts to have more of a voice?
What will be interesting is if she gets the role of Matilda, how creative it is, what creative experience she finds it to be. And we won't know that until it happens, will it? If Matilda goes, actually, Matilda's not like this, she's a bit like that. And the being like that is at odds with what everybody expects from Matilda. So it's that thing of where creative is scary is that suddenly you're stepping off into the dark, over an abyss, and no one knows where you're going to land. Now, that's either exciting or intriguing, or it's quite scary. And I think a lot of the reason why blocks come on a kind of creative moment or offering those creative moments is it's too scary because I don't know what the outcomes are going to be. It could take me somewhere else completely different. It could have Matilda turning into another character altogether. The script doesn't demand that. It demands that Matilda stays as Matilda, not turning into somebody else, you know? And I think there is something about creativity which is scary because of that stepping into the unknown. But there's a great, one of my favourite stories is in King Lear, okay? There's a moment in King Lear where the Duke of Gloucester has been blinded and he asked the fool to take him up on the moor and to push him off a cliff, okay? So they go up to the moor, it's all raging and thunderous and horrible. And he says, push me off a cliff, push me off a cliff. So the fool just pushes him flat on his face. And he wakes up and goes, God, did I fall all that way? And he said, you know, you didn't fall at all. You just fell flat on your face. And the one learning from me on all that was the thing that there is no cliff. And it's the whole thing about creative practice. There ain't no cliff to fall off. You're stepping into the unknown, maybe, but you'll land on chances are you'll land on your face, you know. You might have a few bruises, but you'll live to tell the tale and you'll learn from it. And you'll know there's no cliff. That's the important thing.
For people managers, so for people managers, for business leaders, people who are running organisations, how can they encourage their teams to feel that there is no cliff? Again,
depends on the context, I'd say, really. You know, if you're in an ambulance, okay, and you're in the middle of a kind of A&E emergency, or if you're flying a plane through the winds that we've got today, the last thing anybody wants to know is you're trying a few little kind of creative moments just to see, you know, see if there's no cliff to fall off. So it's also about time and place in all this. You know, there are times in the world to go follow procedure, okay? We don't want any diversion from procedure. If your building's on fire, you get out the building. You don't hang around to debate the fire with the fire, do you? So it's knowing your time, knowing your place, spotting the opportunities to ensure that if you do fall on a face, nobody's going to die as a result of it, you know.
Is that how artists can maybe become more enterprising? You know, make maybe the art more of a career by not fighting the fire sometimes? Because sometimes artists are so passionate, they almost forget to go through process. Could that maybe go the other way?
Yeah.
You know, kind of like we've got this conformity, but on the other side, it's in like for an artist, could they maybe look at kind of creating a few more processes?
If you are a professional artist and you're earning a living through your art, you have been hugely enterprising to kind of get that far. And that's about using your creativity within your own trading and business practice as much as it is on your technique. But I think artists are a lot more enterprising than sometimes we give them credit for. I mean, there is the stereotype, isn't there, of the artist who goes, "Oh, I can't possibly, darling," you know. But I think they're few and far between. And I think certainly if you're making a career as an artist, whether that's a musician or actor or community artist, then you know how the world works, and you know the kind of processes you have to kind of go through to enable you to do what you want to, what you're good at, and what you love doing.
So, how do you build stronger relationships with your communities, young people, stakeholders, partners, collaborators?
Trust is a good thing. We did a project a few years ago called Emerge around 12 towns around the East Midlands. And we were talking about how we developed the next set of, it was a 3-year program. Lots of interesting kind of work came out of it. Lots of new relationships came out with stakeholders and young people. And we wanted to do the next phase of it. And a colleague in Tamworth said to me, things move at the speed of trust. You might want to move quickly. You might want to move at the speed of light, but things will move at the speed of trust. And I thought, yeah, that's so clear and obvious. But it's like, actually, that's the bedrock for this stuff. You do what you say we're going to do, you do it, and you stick to it. Or if you don't stick to it, you've explained how that all works. But it's all about building trust. And how do you build trust with people? You know, you do what you say, you have shared interests, you have shared interest in each other. It's not just about being interested in, the kind of the script that we're in, but we share and appreciate each other as well as the kind of thing that we're kind of working on. And we value each other's experiences and points of view and voices and all that sort of stuff. And we value the lived experience you bring to the table and I bring to the table. And we understand that together we're going to make something new on the table that wasn't there before we started.
How does the Mighty Creatives kind of embrace that and create those opportunities for young people to find their path?
Well, I think going back to creative mentoring work again, the pedagogy, the way of teaching and learning and the way of engaging with the young person from the creative practitioner is all built on that principle of the young person is at the centre, we work in dialogue, there ain't no right answer, and it's slow and steady work, And for some of the young people we're working with who, have been experiencing all kinds of abuse and disadvantage and whatever you want to call it, trauma, over many years, one intervention with an artist isn't going to solve things overnight. Again, it goes back to building trust with that relationship. So eventually the young person can trust not just the outside world, but can trust themselves as well. It doesn't happen quickly though, and it takes time. And it doesn't, sometimes it takes more than the time we have, but that's where we are and that's what we can do. And we know that, that's working. So, but it's a challenging one because it's not a quick fix. I mean, everybody wants a quick fix, don't they? If you're a funder, chances are you want a quick fix to your kind of employment outcomes in the next 6 months, please, and don't be hanging around. When in fact life is far more complicated than that.
What mechanisms do you guys work within or have created to kind of sort of help and support that journey around people's learning and development?
Obviously, as well as put young person in the centre of that process for mentoring, the artist is the other person in the centre of that process. And I always think it's important not to write the adult out of those pictures, because otherwise you get a bit of a sweet shop approach to young people's education, that goes, they're in a sweet shop, they can have whatever they like, whenever they like, and actually life ain't like that, and education's not like that, shouldn't be like that. And so the work we do isn't like that. It's about understanding there's a number of voices in that process. A key one is the young person, obviously, but the second key one is the artist. So we provide a number of support mechanisms for those artists through what we call supervision sessions and continuing professional development sessions and training sessions, and practice sessions as well, where people share practice and share expertise and share their experience of being a mentor as well. So there's a number of different processes which provide the support for the practitioner and therefore the young person in that process. And we do that online as well as kind of in person too.
How do we future-proof the creative sectors? And I say sectors, thinking from a school perspective, because I keep throwing these big holistic kind of ideologies where you're like, where do I start?
Where do we start?
Where do I start? But I'm more thinking with the budget cuts that are happening around kind of sort of the arts, cultures. How do we future-proof these sectors?
Part of that, I'm certainly joking about this, but part of it is about recognising that creativity is as important as respiration and as digestion and as breathing, and as you need a creative outlet as much as you need a house and your medical attention. I'm really hoping that when we have the election later this year in this country, we will see a government that is more attuned to the value of arts and creativity in schools, and is more attuned to providing a higher quality educational model which isn't driven by fear and isn't driven by frightening teachers and head teachers into following procedures and practices that innately they don't agree with or believe in. I think the political system we're in at the moment isn't going to be like this forever. It cannot be like this forever. And next time round, before too long, we'll see a bit of a loosening of the reins a little bit, and a bit more kind of willingness to hear what teachers have to say and go back to what are the values that drive a good teacher. Because there's nothing better in the world than a good teacher.
How can we do that when money's getting cut?
It's not. I don't think it's just about money, you see. I think it's about what you prioritise and what your values are in education, And I think if you could understand that education isn't, 5 years old, your education experience isn't about preparing you for a vocational calling to be an airline pilot, It's about developing you as a young child in a holistic way, as a whole human being way, and understanding that you have lots of different facets to your character and personality that a good education will draw out. That's what they say, isn't it? Kind of education about a drawing out of people, not a kind of, they're not empty vessels to be filled. And so that's a value thing. That's not about money.
It's interesting because there's too much of a focus on money, and I agree with you. And I kind of asked that question because I wanted to press some buttons, really.
Yeah, sure.
But it's interesting the amount of teachers who kind of almost forget why they got into teaching.
Yes,
and
it is
they
a
get
real
pulled
shame.
into then this process, as you were saying.
Yeah.
How can we reignite that passion to want to give that wholesome, rounded life to young people?
Trust teachers. I'd go back to trust again. That they, teachers have gone through a kind of really important process in terms of their own learning and their own training and their own vocational calling. And we know, don't we, that when we've had a good teacher, we've been with a good teacher, it has made so much difference to our lives from a very early age. But you can remember teachers you had when you were 8 or 9 that have stayed with you. I mean, I'm sure we've all got that. And I think for me, that's the thing about trust the teachers, trust their expertise and their professionalism, and you will get a better output, better outcome for your children, for your class, for your school, if you politically we trusted them.
What inspires you to thrive on a personal level?
I think keeping your creative muscle alive, really. And I said, creative is in us all, isn't it? In terms of those innate small creativity functionings, if you like. But I think also personally, I mean, I came into this, out of the science into the theatre because there was something in me that went, I love this acting. I just love this performing, which I did, and still do to a certain extent. And as time goes on, as you kind of work out the career, you get further away from what you do, and every now and then try and go back to where you kind of came from. And I think for me, the last couple of years particularly is about just remembering where this came from and tapping back into that and not losing sight of it. So practically I write a lot. I try and sell books. That's another challenge altogether. And the last year or two I've started singing again publicly. So that again is love doing it. I won't embarrass anybody now by launching into anything because I'm warmed up. But it's that for me is going back to what I loved doing when I was, those many years ago.
So with the writing or the performing, which gets that muscle fired
both together, and they're different. I think they're different sides of, not sides of the brain, but they're different kind of aspects of your personality that things tie into. I mean, the writing is, for me, is much more kind of, it feels more long term in terms of, it takes longer to write something and edit it and shape it and get it out there and try it out and all that sort of stuff. That's one of those, what do they call it, long-term paybacks. There's a word for it, I can't remember. Whereas the singing is immediate. You can be singing in a pub or a festival and whether someone's got you or not. It's the people over there who are there and you're going, yeah, with you. There are people over there who are walking out and if you can turn their head by singing, they're with you, it's immediate. And there's some people over here who are just looking away and are completely embarrassed by the whole thing. But it's that immediacy, whereas the writing for me isn't immediate in that sort of way. So again, it's a balance for me of different muscles for different purposes.
Do you think that balance is important then to kind of find a more wholesome?
For me, yeah, I like that balance. I mean, again, one of the values in doing the science training was I still have that in me, and it provides a good way of thinking that complements a sort of artistic, creative way of thinking, if you like. I mean, they're not different. They're one and the same thing, really, arts and science. But, technology, I think, is interesting, and rational thinking and philosophy and all that sort of is again, I think, another balance. For me, it's about having that balancing act going on,
So, to kind of wrap this conversation up and pulling all this together, how can we collaboratively work together, or possibly
me and you?
Not just you. I was going to talk on a wider level, kind of from a community perspective and in our society. How can we collaboratively work together to just make society thrive again?
I think there's different ways of collaborating, which they're not one's not better than any other. I think it's understanding how there are different models of collaboration. So, for example, Macbeth again. Okay, there's one way of collaborating to deliver Macbeth that is about following the text, following the director, do as you're told, and honour the word, honour the script. That's what they talk about, honour the word of the author. Okay, that's one form of collaboration. You need a lot of different skills to come in together to make a fantastic production of Macbeth. Great. There's another model of Macbeth that goes, here's a script. What are the rules that are making that script happen? How do you change the rules? How do you put your own personal experience into this? And how do you start with, option one starts with Macbeth, it ends with Macbeth. Option two starts with Macbeth, it ends up somewhere else completely different. That's a different form of collaboration with different skill sets and approaches, but they're equally powerful and equally valid ways of collaborating. And I think it's understanding that there's a language of collaboration or a menu of collaboration that not everything suits everybody. If you were putting a show on the West End called Macbeth and you tried using option two to produce it when people are expecting option one, everybody's unhappy. Yeah. So it's about context again and horses courses and picking the right process for the right occasion. So I think that's one answer. And the other answer is about whatever process you choose, you've got to know where you are in the process. Okay. So on the second option I talked about, which is more devising more devising approach, or taken from people's own experiences, and your starting point is different from your end point. That has a very different process from a process of generating ideas and generating input and generating options through to finally editing those options and polishing something for presentation. You need to know where you are in that process. If you start the process and you think you should already be presenting it, you're unhappy. And you've got to the point of presenting it, but you would still want to be generating new stuff, you're unhappy. So it's about, and that goes for option one as well, know where you are in the process, and the collaboration experience will be much more positive for you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you.
It's fun.